welcome to episode 5 of Generation 16, the series showcasing the games of Sega's Mega Drive. I'm your host, Greg Seward. In this episode, we continue to march through December 1989 with a couple more arcade ports, the system's third role-playing game, and what many consider one of, if not the first, modern real-time strategy game. Let's get started. Truxton is the latest in what will become a long line of vertical and horizontal shooters on the Mega Drive. This genre was thriving in the 90s, and both the Mega Drive and PC Engine saw more than their fair share of them. Truxton also marks the first Mega Drive release from Toplon, which was a prolific shooter developer from 1984 to its closure in 1994, and begat such companies as Cave and 8-ing. Truxton is a relatively difficult shooter where you must fight your way through enemies both airborne and landlocked over 5 lengthy areas comprised of multiple stages. You have a choice of 3 different weapons, and unlike many shooters that came after, switching between these weapons during battle does not come with any sort of penalty. Weapon power is dictated by the amount of P icons you collect along the way. Take a hit and you die. Furthermore, you'll lose a bit of weapon strength when you die, depending on how much you had at the moment of your untimely demise. Truxton is a solid shooter, and as it was released over a year after Thunder Force 2, I'm sure it was a welcome sight for shooter fans on the Mega Drive. It's a testament to how much more popular the Genesis was in the West than the Mega Drive was in its own country, when you consider that there have only been 2 games released in the system's first year that didn't eventually receive a release in North America. And honestly, Osamatsu-kun and Super Dyson Yaku could have easily made the trip across the pond and been worthwhile additions to the early Genesis library. Then there's Mahjong Cop Ryuu. I honestly have no idea what's going on here. This is basically a graphic novel where you sift your way through conversations with a pretty wacky cast of characters. Eventually someone challenges someone to a game of Mahjong, and it's on. What follows is a two-player version of the classic game, except that Ryuu can earn various powers to help him get new pieces, see his opponent's hand, etc. I don't know what else to say about it because I really couldn't get past the first match. Here's a bit of trivia for you though. Mahjong Cop Ryuu was the first Mega Drive game developed by Whiteboard. We'll be seeing them again in Generation 16 under a few different names, most notably as Megasoft when they developed the much more Western-friendly Shinobi 3. If you pay attention to video game history at all, you've likely already heard of Herzog Zwei. This is the game that many gamers consider the birth of the modern real-time strategy genre, paving the way for such keystone titles as Dune 2, Command & Conquer, and the Warcraft series. It should be noted that the game is definitely an evolution on already existing real-time strategy games, like Danny Bunton's Modem Wars and its own predecessor, Herzog, for the MSX2 and NEC PC-88 platforms. Today the game is revered, but when it was released over 20 years ago, it's safe to say a lot of gamers just didn't get it, especially in the Western world. For example, it was the lowest rated Genesis game at the time in Electronic Gaming Monthly, with an average score of 4.25. Apparently it didn't set the retail world on fire either. I don't think you could blame people for not getting it, though. After all, Technosoft was more known for its Thunder Force series of shooters, which Herzog Zwei bears more than a passing resemblance to. So I'm guessing most folks were expecting that sort of experience the first time they fired up this game. What they got, though, was a resource micromanagement game with heavy shooter elements. You control a transformable mech, much like the variable fighter from Macross, and are charged with destroying your enemy's main base while protecting your own from a similar fate. To do this, you must build an army in real time, positioning them in the most strategic locations and assigning them specific duties, such as defending their position, patrolling a particular area, or taking a nearby base. You've got finite resources though. Cash is earned incrementally over time. Cash flow can be increased based on how many sub-bases you control on the current map. And not only does each new unit cost money, but reassigning them requires a bit of funding as well. The result is a mad scramble to create and assign units, all the while being constantly vigilant for enemy attacks on any of your bases. The more sub-bases you capture, the better, but it also means your defenses are even more strung out and open to invasion. While the general mechanics make for an interesting single-player game, the AI is generally regarded as pretty poor in Herzog Zwei. Luckily, there's a split-screen two-player mode that makes up for this. Get two players who know what they're doing and you're in for an epic battle. Herzog Zwei surely seems primitive by today's standards. The RTS genre has evolved quite a bit from this cramped setup where the user only has direct control over a single unit at a time. But 20 years ago, this game was groundbreaking, and stands as one of the most iconic Mega Drive games ever released. Sadly, it seems that the Herzog series died with this game. A third game was supposedly planned and scrapped for the Doom 32X platform. And since Technosoft closed its doors in 2001, it's highly doubtful the brand will ever see the light of day again. And here we have the Mega Drive's third RPG in 9 months. Vermilion marks the very first time Yu Suzuki's Development Division No. 2 team created a game designed specifically for a home console. It was normally an arcade game division that concentrated on 3D titles. Vermilion is pretty unique among its contemporaries in that it features 3 distinct gameplay styles. Town exploration and battles take place in a genre-standard overhead view, while world and dungeon exploration are done in a 3D interface. Notice how the graphic engine bears more than a passing resemblance to previous Mega Drive incarnations of Development Division 2 games like Super Thunderblade and Super Hang-On. Finally, we have the Archfiend battles, which are side-scrolling action affairs featuring relatively large creatures to slay. Vermilion really seems like it was designed more as a technical showcase for the Mega Drive than anything else. The plot itself, after all, is pretty bog-standard JRPG stuff. I have to admit there's something about the constantly switching playstyles that makes Vermilion seem more interesting than it actually is. Really all we have here is a standard Japanese RPG where you fight endless random battles in order to gain levels until you're strong enough to endure more random battles as you fight your way through the next challenge or dungeon. The fact that the world is presented in 3D and that the battles are fought in real time makes Vermilion stand out. This was not lost on Sega itself, as it features Sword of Vermilion heavily in its famous Genesis Does What Nintendo Don't ad campaign. If there's one major complaint I have about Vermilion, it's that the battles can be overly difficult. Random battles tend to drop your character in the center of a large group of enemies who all converge on you so fast it's hard not to take a few hits up front. Plus, your hero's attack range is frighteningly small. The thing that struck me about Vermilion as I played it for this episode is the variety of music found in the game, not to mention the quality. Vermilion goes beyond the genre standard for the time, where you had one music track for towns, one for world exploration, and one for dungeon exploration. There's actually a fair amount of unique stuff in here, and it's all quite good thanks to the involvement of prolific Sega composer Hiroshi Kawaguchi. Kawaguchi collaborated on most Development Division No. 2 and AM2 titles back in the day, and is still active today, composing tracks for games like Bayonetta and Outrun 2. Our final game this episode is the first appearance of what would become a major franchise for Sega. The original Golden Axe hit arcades earlier in 1989, and was the brainchild of Makoto Uchida, who was previously responsible for Altered Beast. In fact, if you pay attention, you'll hear a few shared sound effects between the two games, not to mention a cameo appearance by one of the creatures featured in Altered Beast. Up to 2 players choose from one of 3 different warriors: the broadsword-wielding Axe Battler, the dwarf Gilius Thunderhead, or the Amazon Tyrus Flare. In these 3 warriors, you found different traits based on speed, power, and magic ability. The goal is to exterminate countless underlings on your way to destroy the evil Death Adder, who has kidnapped the king and princess and wields the legendary Golden Axe in his bid to rule the land. Actually, in the Mega Drive version, you get a look at Death Adder's mentor, Deathbringer, who is actually running the show. This is something that was added to some of the home releases in order to pad out what was still an extremely short game. Another option called Dual Mode was also added to the Mega Drive game in order to extend the experience. Here you try to survive against ever more difficult groups of enemies in arena-style battles. As ports go, Golden Axe on the Mega Drive isn't too bad. The action of the arcade game is generally captured here, and the graphics are decent for an early-run Mega Drive title. If there is one major downfall, it's the super basic enemy AI. Each battle can tend to feel exactly like the last, as each group of enemies will react to your tactics in exactly the same ways over and over and over again. It probably goes without saying, but Uchida was a big fan of action movies, particularly Conan the Barbarian, and has gone on record that Golden Axe was his attempt to create a game like that movie. In fact, the various screams in the game were apparently recorded directly from movies like First Blood, Commando, and Conan the Barbarian, though I'm guessing that applies more to the arcade version than the home game. Golden Axe was one of the defining games of the beat-em-up genre, blazing the trail along with the likes of Double Dragon and Capcom's Final Fight. Online Arcade Database Killer List of Video Games named it one of the top 100 games of all time, and the only entry in the list from the year 1989. Indeed, Sega would return to this well multiple times in the coming years, culminating with the fantastic Streets of Rage series. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. We've got one more game from December 1989 to look at in the next episode of Generation 16. Then it's on to the 90s and the calm before the storm in North America. See you then!